like to call this meeting of the Planning Commission Wednesday, October 23rd to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Chairwoman Amanda Denmark, Vice Chairman Charlie Wetmore,
Here.
Commissioner Michael Brock,
Here.
Commissioner Rich Delcor,
Here.
Commissioner Lydia DePaul,
Here.
Commissioner Jim Flynn, Commissioner Daniel Grove.
Okay, notice regarding adjournment. The Planning Commission will not hear new items after 9:30 if we're here at 9:30 anyways, unless authorized by a majority vote of the commission members present. Items which have not been heard before 9:30 may be continued to the next regular meeting or a special meeting date as determined by the commission members. Do I have a motion on the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adopting the minutes from September 25th?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are adopted. Do we have any public comments?
Yes.
Okay, public comments can come at this time or actually at the agenda item. So who has the public? Two gentlemen back there, or do you want to wait until we're actually discussing that agenda item? Okay. Seeing as there's no old business, new business, number one, Magnolia Square street naming, a request by Willie Powell of Ward Edwards, Inc. on behalf of Ed Gillis of ERB Enterprises for LLC for approval of a street naming application. The project consists of 3 internal streets for the Magnolia Square mixed-use development. The property contains 3 lots zoned neighborhood general, 1 lot zoned neighborhood core, and 2 lots zoned residential general, and consists of approximately 3.43 acres identified by the tax map numbers in the agenda, located at 1203 to 1217 May River Road and 15 to 19 Jason Street. Angie.
Hey, good evening, Commissioners. Our first item today is a street naming for Magnolia Square. This is a request by Willie Powell of Ward Edwards, Inc. on behalf of Ed Goaz for a approval of a street naming application. The applicant is requesting the approval of the following street names for the future development of Magnolia Square. Apollo's Way, Loden Lane, Stoba Street, and Pluff Street were the names that were accepted. The preliminary development plan was approved on September 27th of last year. The staff comments for this street naming application were heard at the August 14th, 2024 Development Review Committee meeting. Here we have the exhibit showing the 2 roads that they would like to name and the proposed street names for those. I did slash out the names that were not approved.
Just to pause you real quick, because this came up in DRC, did we ever find out who denied Stock Farm Road? Because we didn't have an answer to that at that time.
Part of the review
Dan was there,
process was our GIS department and emergency services. And through that review process, it was not approved by either.
I truly would like to know who did not approve
I
it.
think it came, you mean whether it was Hilton Head or the county? I don't know which one, but one of them came back saying that I got the impression that it came back saying that the name has already been used without them recognizing that it's across the street.
Well, but that's, and we can get into, I'll let you finish your presentation. We'll discuss that in a minute.
Okay.
Thanks.
As granted by the powers and duties set forth in Section 2 of the Unified Development Ordinance, the Planning Commission has the authority to take the following actions with respect to this application. You can approve the application as submitted by the applicant, approve the application with conditions, or deny the application as submitted by the applicant. This is a slide of the review criteria, which was included in the staff report in your packet. Town staff finds that the requirements of Section 3.15.3 of the Unified Development Ordinance have been met and recommends that the Planning Commission approve the following 4 street names. I have produced a suggested motion for you, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time. We do have the applicant representative here if you would like to ask him any questions as well.
Commissioner, there is a Stock Farm Road it's right near Old Joy Donuts.
It's across the street from this road.
Yeah.
Which its logical extension across the street would be to keep that name. And that is, can you go back to the map for a second, please?
Gotcha.
See under Road 2 where it says Stock Farm Road?
Mhm.
It's literally across the street, and so common sense dictates that you would continue that name, so you're either turning right or left on Stock Farm Road, yet here we sit where we're about to name it something totally different.
Gotcha.
That's where it doesn't make any sense to me.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
Willie Powell, whatever, I think
Can we, do we have the right to still kind of pursue the Stock Farm Road angle down the road, even if we approve names tonight? So if we get approval down the road, we can still use Stock Farm Road. We're not bound to use those 4 names, are we? Or can we?
No.
Okay.
You have to choose from the names that are approved, and my thought, fellow commissioners, is that we give, or my inclination is, we give an approval for those 4 names and for Stock Farm Road with the condition that the applicant can kind of research it. Because I don't know if y'all feel as strongly as I do about this, but it just, to me, doesn't make sense to go an extra block and totally change the road name. And I know there is a precedent for road names changing across May River Road, but
Right. We talked about this internally with staff, and we did have a little concern that Stock Farm Road represents Stock Farm, the community. As opposed to, it's a name that has to do with Stock Farm versus just a regular public street.
Stock Farm Road was there before the community was there.
Okay.
Okay. They named the community after that road. That's actually what happened. Mr. McCracken started selling lots on the original Stock Farm Road, and then he created the Stock Farm community. I'm open to thoughts on this.
Do we have the authority to do that even if another agency has denied it?
I think, ultimately the follow through is when this gets subdivided, the street names go on the subdivision plat. We follow the process of checking with other communities when they come back and they say no, that road name shouldn't be used. We honor that as staff after we bring to you guys. If you guys approve it as an option, I think we would want there to be some verification prior to me stamping off on the subdivision plat and go to the town. Meaning
Correct.
you
That
would
was-
work with it.
Right, and that was my question too, is are we bound to use a name approved at Planning Commission if it's already a name in use?
You're bound to use 2 of the names approved.
Okay, that's why I'd like to have that added to the.
But here's the thing, and we don't have our attorney here to back me up or be against me on this, but if we approve Stock Farm as a potential road name, we can improve it in such a way that it must be also approved by the other entities in the process. So what this is doing is this is keeping them from having to come back to us because we've approved the other 4 names, and then next week they get Stock Farm approved. Now they have to come back to Planning Commission.
Because we could work with the applicant on that follow through.
So we should make it a condition of the motion.
If we're so inclined, I would think we make it a condition of the motion and
Subject to approval by, 911.
subject to staff verification that other entities approve it.
Well, Commissioner Wetmore or Dan, question about this point that street names change when they cross May River Road. Is that universal?
No, it's just, you see here, a lot of times a tie-in street will change names. But, name changes, it isn't even across the street sometimes. It's as you're driving down the same street, all of a sudden you're on a different one. It's definitely unique to South Carolina.
Like Hayward goes to Pin Oak. I think can go, and Stock Farm goes to Whispering Pine.
May River Road goes to Bruin.
Bruin, yeah, I was gonna say.
I think in the interest of continuity and
Yeah.
people knowing where the heck they're going.
Yeah, sometimes you have two streets with different names, and they eventually tie together. When they tie together, folks are reluctant to change the whole street into one street name because people have historically used a different address. So that's how it happens sometimes.
I think nothing will be addressed off of this roadway. It's strictly for mapping purposes only. I think all the addresses will be either off of The Route 1 or off of May River Road.
Well, if you want to take it to the language of the proposed motion, if somebody's inclined to make a motion?
Would you be, can you make the motion since you've got this clearly in your head?
Clear as mud. Okay. I move to approve the following street names for the Magnolia Square development. Apollo's Way, Loudon Lane, Soba Street, and Pluff Street. Also move that Planning Commission approves Stock Farm Road if the other entities that are involved also approve fully.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, the motion passed.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 2, workshop regarding request to allow carports in Old Town Historic District. Ms. Charlotte,
Thank you. Good evening. This is a workshop, and as such, we will be taking no votes or making any recommendations. This is simply an informal opportunity for us to discuss potentially allowing metal carports within the Old Town Bluffton Historic District. We do have an application that you will hear next month, November, and that will be the formal process to make that recommendation and then to move it forward to Town Council. So the impetus for this particular workshop and text amendment is that we have a property owner in Old Town who constructed a metal carport, and that's in addition to a carriage house that is already located on his property. This is not his particular carport, it's the one next to it. So within Old Town Bluffton, metal carports of a certain size, 122 square feet or greater, are considered carriage houses. Because we have a form-based code, we call out specific building types. Accessory buildings are called carriage houses when they are 122 square feet or greater. So in this particular case, the applicant has an existing carriage house already. It's a ground floor garage with an upper story residential. And then in addition to that, the applicant or the property owner installed a metal carport. So within Old Town, you can only have 2 carriage houses. So in this case, one. So in this case, there's a violation, one, in that it was installed without going through the process. There was no building permit. And then after that violation notice was sent, then we also discovered that it's in violation of the Unified Development Ordinance. So the property owner would like to retain the metal carport as constructed. It's over 700 square feet, and it covers a recreational vehicle, I believe a boat and a golf cart. So what he would like to do is to maintain that particular metal carport and not have to go through the design review requirements that would be required of a carriage house. So interestingly too, the next door neighbor was also cited for installing a metal carport without going through the process. It's the one that you see here. And that property owner has filed a COFA, a Certificate of Appropriateness application, to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission in November. And they've gone through the process. And this particular carport would be fine, but they do have to meet some requirements related to the post that they have to comply with the Unified Development Ordinance. So we're not saying that carports aren't permitted. It's just that you cannot have 2 carriage houses, and they also have to be consistent with the design requirements of Old Town Bluffton Historic District. So we've got a couple of things going on here. So the property owner that filed the text amendment provided some photos that I want to show you. And so these carports do exist throughout Old Town Bluffton. I cannot tell you if some of these were built prior to our Unified Development Ordinance being adopted, which was August 2011. There's some other ones as well. We'd have to do the research to determine whether or not they were legal or if they're grandfathered, if they existed before the 2011 UDO adoption or after. And that would take some work. I assume that some of these are in fact grandfather looking at them. And so they are throughout Old Town. Let me change the view on this so we can see. So, yeah, it's maybe an older one. So really what we're talking about today, again, this is just an informal setting to talk about whether or not we believe metal carports should be something we might want to consider allowing separate from the carriage house requirements. I am not here to provide any recommendation. I don't have a text to provide you to talk about. This is just to introduce the subject, and if there's anyone in the audience that wants to speak, to allow them to weigh in on it too. Again, we'll bring this formal amendment to you in November. We are also having a workshop with the Historic Preservation Commission to get their feedback as well. So I'm
When
glad.
is that workshop?
It's the next Preservation Commission meeting, which I believe is November 6th. Week after next.
And the process on this, we're talking a potential UDO update.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct, and that would go through the Planning Commission for a recommendation. If there's any feedback from the Historic Preservation Commission, we'll provide that to you at the November meeting. If you take a vote in November, then it will go to a first reading to Town Council in January, and then a second reading and public hearing in February.
Okay.
So now I may have confused you. We're referring to metal carports as carriage houses. And when I think carriage house, I think, an accessory dwelling unit with a garage underneath. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. Carriage house is the building form, and if it's 122 square feet or greater, then we do consider the accessory building to be a carriage house. So just keep that in mind.
So there's no verbiage for enclosed.
Correct.
So to clarify, so every carport is a carriage house?
Anything 122 square feet or greater.
Anything under?
Over.
Over.
What happened with the shed language? Did that ever get adopted or?
It did.
Okay, and that's the 122.
When I was looking at this tonight, I think we have an inconsistency. I think we referred to is it 121 square feet? I think we identified sheds as 121 square feet or less, but then we've also identified carriage houses as 121 square feet or greater. I think a carriage house is 122 square feet or greater.
Let's pause there if everybody's okay with it. Let's hear the public comments and continue the discussion.
Keith Fisher.
And I probably don't need to say this, but in public comments, we ask that you respect the commission. Don't call anybody out by name. Begin by identifying yourself by name and address, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Members of the Planning Commission, my name is Steve Fisher. I am the owner of 41 Thomas Hayward Street, the one with the structure in question. We did the text amendment, and within the narrative, which I think you have a copy of as well, just explaining why we did the structure was to protect our RV, our investments. We've had tree damage before on another one. So our neighbor installed one, we installed one. It's a less expensive way to go about protection and other than building, a carriage house or another structure. When we went through the UDO, didn't see anything that called out carports. Didn't feel it was an accessory structure or a supporting structure. No power, it's gravel base. It does meet all wind ratings of 140 miles an hour. Once again, the reason we did it was to protect our investments, at the time. So, once again, I think everything I've kind of just explained in the narrative in there to try to get our point across on why we're trying to salvage what we have and work with the town historic committee in regards to looking into classification of possibly changing the UDO or amending the UDO to allow this. Going back, I believe the UDO was adopted in 2011. Going back on Google Earth, the majority of these were installed after the fact that are throughout Old Town and been here for years. One of the pictures will clearly show 4 carports, and one of the pictures, 2 smaller carports. All my neighbors pretty much have carports. After driving around Old Town, taking a few pictures, there's quite a few more that popped up that were installed after the adoption. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Keith Berlin.
He actually said everything. There's nothing really to add to that.
But you have 3 whole minutes to talk. Okay, so Charlotte, you're just looking for kind of a temperature of the room, I guess, as to whether this makes sense to add as a UDO edit or as a designation and what it might look like.
Correct,
We're going to get feedback from HPC as well before it becomes a formal agenda item.
correct.
But you need to know kind of how to craft it.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize again that we do allow metal carports, provided they meet the design requirements of the UDO. But you're only allowed to have 1 carriage house per lot.
Charlotte?
But a metal carport has to be less than 122 square feet?
No. When it's 122 square feet or greater, then it's a carriage house. And in
You
this
just said
case,
we allow carports
As a carriage house.
as a carriage.
correct.
Yeah. Anything over 122 carport is a carriage house.
So let me ask you this. So I want to build a 1,200 square foot carriage house. I want to put 600 square foot downstairs, 600 upstairs. That's the max size of a carriage house. I can't put a carport next
Correct.
to that carriage house. That
Correct.
counts as square feet even though it's outside.
Doesn't
And
it
it's a second
exclude
building.
porches?
It would be considered a second, excuse me, a second accessory structure on the property too.
Even if it's attached to that carriage house I just explained. So I'd have to take away 200 square feet of interior space to make that.
And you'd have to comply with the design requirements of the UDO.
Question, Charlotte. Mr. Fisher mentioned that when he looked at Google Maps, there weren't that many before 2011, but now there's quite a few. How did all these carports get constructed without anybody approving it?
I wouldn't know without reviewing each individually to know how long it's been there, whether or not it received a building permit, what the UDO at the time was, what the language was in the UDO. I mean, potentially there could have been amendments that allowed some earlier ones. I don't know. I don't think so. But there are a variety of factors that come into play, and without
So-
doing the research, I
So the
don't know.
pictures that we've seen, are any of these meeting the carriage house criteria?
Design-wise, no. Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't spent any time, again, researching any of these individually. So I mean, this one does not either. But that would take some time for staff to determine how long these have been here.
From a temperature standpoint, Commissioner Whitmore, I find it troubling that we're looking at approving a new design because we've had so many people construct, quote, illegal or unconforming carports. Just a temperature check. I need to know more. Some of the stuff that we just talked about with Charlotte would help, but
Just a clarifying question on the porch situation that you referenced, Commissioner Whitmore. I think I could be misremembering, but I always thought for a carriage house, you have an 800 maximum square foot footprint, but that excludes porches, and that the 1,200 square feet also excluded porches.
So a carport.
So if it was attached, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was that you could have a 800 square foot enclosed first floor, plus porches and still have a 400 square foot space above, or you could split, the 1,200 of enclosed space could be split differently between floors so long as it doesn't exceed 800 on the ground floor. But you still have additional footprint that you can use as porches, which when we're dealing with carports, that's essentially a porch.
Haven't looked at it that way, and that may be an interpretation by the UDO administrator,
Okay.
whether or not that would be considered a porch. I mean, in this case, the
It doesn't apply to
RV
this.
is, 700 square feet, so I don't,
It is my recollection of that as well, but.
It's not to say that you could end up with a 1,200 square foot porch attached to your carriage house. Like, I think the massing guidelines that we have in place in the UDO would prevent that from really being more than a one-car sized addition as a carport, but I think that would help to clarify what is permitted or how the UDO administrator interprets those square footage limitations.
and I can have that for you for the November meeting.
But I agree with you, and I also think it's kind of confusing to say that we approve metal carports because, I guess, but you have to wrap the columns, you have to have at least a 412 roof slope on it, or 312 roof slope on it. It has to have either standing seam or 5E crimp or asphalt shingle roofs, so yes, but with like a ton of modifications to make it meet the materiality that we require in the historic district. And we've had many, like we weren't even allowed to use T111, which when painted looks like a V-groove would, and that's not acceptable. So to me, like the aesthetic of that would have been keeping in with that, but I don't know that the carport, a detached metal freestanding carport that doesn't meet the material, the column size, the foundation, any of that stuff, I would not be amenable to that particular change.
It almost seems like we'd have to be creating a new thing just for metal carports, because it would be so hard for people to make a carport meet all of the criteria you just identified.
It's cost prohibitive, but it is possible. There's a lot of people that have done that as well. Sometimes in lieu of I guess mostly in lieu of like using a carport as a carriage house. So it's completely possible to have a carport that meets the criteria, but it wouldn't be a prefab element that you could just drop. I guess I also would just question too, when we are trying to keep if the point of the UDO is to keep the character of historic Old Town, not to say that these buildings haven't existed, but is that the character that was intended to be kept when the document was written?
And on the characters of the fire.
I think it's really hard to call a carriage, it's hard to claim a carport as a carriage house. I think that's, and I think it's difficult to restrict people to not be able to have a carport. I know there's certain design guidelines that are necessary, but I think restricting people from having that unenclosed space that's covered to protect their property, I think that's really important. And I think restricting that under the verbiage that it's a carriage house, because if it's over 120 square feet, that's a 10 by 12. You're not putting anything under a 10 by 12. I mean, a small John boat or a golf cart, but still something's going to stick out and it's still going to get weathered. So it's not doing any good. It's got to be bigger than that, but then you're calling it a carriage house when it's not a carriage house. It's unenclosed. I understand it needs design standards, but I think restricting people by calling it a carriage house because it's larger than 120, I just don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair for a landowner to not be able to have that. So I do think something needs to be modified to allow for unenclosed storage that's covered, that's larger than 120 square feet.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I would have an issue personally making the carriage house go from 1 to 2. I don't think that the lots that have been designed and subdivided and everything else can even realistically really accommodate that. And I think that's a totally different, there's so many people who have respected the process and gone through the process and been denied being able to do what they want to do, that it seems not ideal to go back and then say you can have 2 carriage houses. So then
They're
you
not
need to
carriage houses.
but they are because it's a form-based code. So the form-based code is that you're intended to have one main house or one primary structure of a certain size and one secondary structure of a certain size. It's not, calling it a carriage house is just defining the square footage of the structure. So I think I would lean on HPC to give us guidance on if they feel like the development pattern supports having multiple additional outbuildings besides just one primary and one secondary, because that's really what what it is servicing, is that there's only one secondary structure on the property. And then I do think if we go down we should add carport as building type. I think there's a lot that needs to be in those guidelines. You have to redefine what a carriage house is in terms of square footage. I think we need to define what a carport is and what they're allowed to have, because this is easily going to turn into, we built a carport that's not a carriage house, but then we enclosed it and turned it. I mean, I think you're going to end up with multiple people that will try to use whatever we write to be able to expand upon the intended meaning. So just making sure that however we write that language, if we were to go in that direction, really restricts it to exactly what we're trying to allow and not just leaving a bunch of loopholes for other things to happen that weren't intended.
Totally agree with what you're saying. I would hate to see us having multiple structures on places where we don't want it. And there would have to be some guidelines if we create something just for carports that would say, what should it look like? Otherwise, Katie bar the door, we can have anything at all. And it could be who knows how high it could be. So, if we're going to go down that route, I think we have to take all those things into consideration. I agree with you.
Don't throw anything at me. I've got some pretty strong feelings on this, and I try not to pull this out often, but as a resident of Bluffton for the most part of 33 years, we moved here when we had 700 people. We had a saying back then that I don't hear as often now because I think we've overly restricted in some areas. We were known as a town of $1 million homes next to mobile homes. We were known as a town that had the ability to do some things that were out of character. And my biggest fear when we created the UDO, and even before that with the Old Town Master Plan, is that we were going to have a bunch of cookie cutter properties. Now we have a scenario where somebody wants to cover a boat, a golf cart, whatever, in a non-enclosed structure, and we technically with the UDO don't have a way of allowing them to do that. To me, that's a challenge. So I agree in part with what's said here. I think we do need a carport or unenclosed structure guideline. Maybe it's down outside of the town, down in Aljoy, some people have put picnic structures up along the water so they could have a picnic table under it and enjoy it. To me, that would fit this category as well. And I think we do need to address, can it be metal? What does it look like? What are the guidelines on it? But I think people need to have a certain sense of, this is me, a certain sense of freedom and creativity to keep the character of Bluffton that was here for a long time before we all got here. I don't know what that looks like. And I know I'm making it as clear as mud for you, Charlotte, and I know you've got I think going through HPC is going to help us in guidelines and suggestions they have, but I'm going to say, I personally am very reluctant to say, no, we can't have these. Again, clear as mud, but a couple of points. If we do create this designation, which I think we should, we've got to limit the number. You know, one unenclosed structure that remains unenclosed, if it becomes enclosed, then they violated the ordinance. I do like what I heard earlier. The gentleman said that his carport had no power. Maybe that's a designation, is that these unenclosed structures have no power, no water. You know, that could be a guideline for them. Beyond that, I'm very curious. I'll probably go to the November 6th HPC and sit in the crowd and listen.
Any thoughts on square footage, size, height?
I don't know how y'all feel, commissioners, up to a 2-car,
What?
a boat and a car, square footage she's talking about.
I thought you said height.
I did both. I mean,
Square
just
footage and height.
putting it out there if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, single story, first and foremost.
What is it, what is that height?
Does the UDO define what a single story is?
It doesn't, and I'm thinking, well, it's no greater than 12 feet, which for an RV is not going to work.
Right. That was what I was getting at, because the one you have on the screen doesn't look like it's 12 feet. Maybe it is, but if you have big RVs, they're not going to fit under 12 feet. And at that point, where do we stop?
Or boats. A boat's not gonna fit in 12 feet with a center console that has a cover on it. It's not gonna work. So, yeah, it's gotta be,
I struggle with that.
Struggle with
because
what?
With raising it to the height that's shown in that photo or substantially more than 12 feet for many reasons. I think whatever we do, this structure needs to feel like the most secondary structure on the property. It should not compete with the main house. It should not compete with the carriage house. I think the carriage house, as written, should be the more primary between these two. And I think we don't even allow garage doors over like 9 feet tall. So the thought of being able to accommodate like a 16 or 20-foot tall building because somebody has an RV, I mean, I just don't know that that's appropriate for the scale of the architecture that we have in the historic district, personally. And I would think square footage wise, I would want the footprint to be less than a carriage house. And probably if we're going for like 2 cars, it's probably somewhere in the 400-ish square feet range would be a max.
I agree with your point about the height. I didn't think we were at the point where we're saying carriage house plus a carport. I thought we were still discussing whether you could have 3 things: primary, carriage, carport. I mean, some people, if it's primary and carport, okay. I would want to have a discussion about whether we're not going to have three structures on a property before we jumped into that.
I think if we remove the carport from the carriage house definition, then you're allowing, right now it's either or. You can have 2 structures. You can decide what you want that carriage house structure to be. If we create a new designation and allow one, then we're talking 3 structures. Otherwise, there's not really any purpose of removing it from the carriage house designation so I think by creating that new category, you're saying it's okay to have 3.
And I'm not sure I
And if
agree
we're
with that.
not, then I think it just stays in the carriage house definition because a carriage house can be open air. And either way, I think the materiality is defined in the UDO of what we're allowed to do. I don't think we need to create a new material palette. Personally, I think it should just comply with Chapter 5, but.
Okay.
I don't have a challenge with 3 structures. I also don't, and believe me, I hear you, Lydia, I understand what you're talking about. I'm also looking at some of these properties that I walk by every day and the one that I own, and I don't have any intention of putting a carport on my property. But I could easily park 2 or 3 RVs on my property if I want, and that doesn't violate anything.
But it's still, to me, less visually obtrusive than having something that's that tall as a structure.
Until you factor in the 48-inch hickory that might fall down on it.
Well, if it falls down, it's going to crush your carport too.
It's a strong carpet. No, but, or a limb or whatever. But yeah, I struggle with this. I struggle with property owners being able to do what they want to do with their property, but with us keeping the character of the historic district. And my view of the historic district is probably a little warped compared to most people's because the historic the history of Old Town Bluffton has it's been a little junky and a little cool. And I'm afraid we're losing a little bit of that junky. You know, necessarily mean this is the junkie I'm thinking of, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. I don't want it to end up looking cookie cutter USA.
And that's me personal.
I don't either, but all these pictures, I think we were told, were not permitted.
And that I really can't tell you for certain. These are just examples of other carports throughout Old Town. I don't know how long they've been there. I don't know if they're legally permitted. They might be grandfathered. No idea without doing the research.
I bet you if you asked everyone, they put them up in 2010.
With the building permit, yeah.
Well, any other thoughts, commissioners?
Okay, this has been helpful. I
Hopefully
have some
November 6th.
direction, and I will talk to the UDO administrator about the interpretation of the carriage house and the unenclosed space, whether or not that counts. So I'll look into that. So this was very helpful. Thank you.
What time is the meeting on November 6th?
6 p.m.
Is it in this room?
It is. We've got 3 other items on the agenda that night, so the discussion will be the last one.
So show up at 7. You never know, I know.
And just a word, thank you, Mr. Fisher, for coming out. Appreciate your perspective. Please understand it's a little messy for our discussion, but that's how we get to progress. Thank you.
And be a part of the discussion. I encourage you to go to HPC if you can. This has to go through a recommendation from HPC, a formal recommendation from Planning Commission, and 2 readings in Town Council if it's to be successful.
We've been working hand in hand with members on the staff in regards to everyone from the mayor to the assistant town manager. In regards to this. We definitely want to rectify and clarify everything that's there, hoping to keep our structure. And just for height restrictions, an RV is a minimum, or the fifth wheel is 13.6 minimum height clearance to be able to get something in.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Commissioners, anything else for discussion? Okay, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
We have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meetings are adjourned. Yeah.
Guess who won? Guess who won?